Have you ever wondered what happens after an empire falls? And I don't just mean, new countries on a map. I'm talking about what happens inside people's heads, in their culture, and in how they see themselves. Well, today, we're going to dig into a huge idea that helps us understand all of that, post-colonialism. It's basically a new way of looking at the world, a way to understand the stories we tell long after the old flags have come down.
All right, so to really get a grip on post-colonialism, we first have to talk about what it came from. Colonialism. Yeah, the words sound super similar, but trust me, they're worlds apart. One is about the action, the takeover, and the other is about thinking through all the consequences. Okay, here's the easiest way to think about it. Colonialism, that was the actual invasion. It was soldiers, ships, guns, the physical act of taking over a place. Post-colonialism, on the other hand, is the investigation after the fact. It's like being a detective, sifting through the mental and cultural rubble to figure out what was really left behind. And to give you a sense of just how massive this was, get this, at its peak, the British Empire ruled over 1 out of every 4 people on the entire planet. This wasn't some small historical event. It was a global system that completely rewired how the world worked. But then, after World War II, everything started to change. The big empires began to crumble, and this massive wave of decolonization swept across the globe. All these new nations were suddenly born, but with that freedom came this huge identity crisis. People had to ask themselves, okay, after centuries of being ruled by someone else, who are we now? What parts of our culture are actually ours, and what parts were just forced on us? So, it's these exact questions that sparked the whole field of post-colonial studies. And if you're going to talk about post-colonialism, you have to talk about one guy in particular, Edward Said. His book Orientalism came out in 1978, and it was a total game changer. Said argued that empires weren't just held together by armies, but by something way more powerful, stories. Just listen to this quote from a British prime minister talking about Egypt. The thinking here is just wild. He's basically saying, we, the British, understand Egyptian civilization better than the Egyptians do, so we have a right, no, a duty, to rule them for their own good. It's this deep-seated belief that one culture knows best and gets to define another. And that whole way of thinking is what Said called Orientalism. It wasn't just about studying the East. It was a whole system for creating a specific version of the Orient that made the West look good and justified its control. It was a story that painted the East as exotic and mysterious, sure, but also as lazy, irrational, and basically in need of saving by the West.
Said came up with this really brilliant metaphor to explain it. He said to imagine the West as a theater director. First, the director builds a stage and calls it the Orient. Then, they write the script, and they fill that script with all those stereotypes we just talked about. And finally, the people who actually live in the East are just treated like actors who are supposed to play these parts. It shows you how ideas and stories can control people just as much as armies can.
Okay, so now that we've got the big picture from Said, let's zoom in on a few key terms that post-colonial thinkers use all the time. Think of these as a few essential tools for seeing the world through this lens.
First up is the idea of the other. This is a classic us versus them move. To make your own group seem normal or civilized, you create an other, a group that you define as the opposite. Strange, primitive, different. It's a really simple but powerful way to create a hierarchy where we are on top and they are on the bottom. But of course, real life is always way messier than that, right? Cultures don't stay in separate boxes. They crash into each other, they mix, they borrow, they blend. And that's what post-colonial thinkers call hybridity. It's the idea that when cultures mix under colonial rule, they don't just erase one another, they create something totally new in the process. New kinds of language, food, music, you name it. Now, this cultural mixing can also create a really intense feeling of being torn in two. This idea is called double consciousness. It's that feeling of looking at yourself through two sets of eyes at the same time, your own and the eyes of the colonizer. It's this constant sense of being split, of judging yourself by two different standards. So, I know these ideas can sound a little abstract, a little academic, but the cool thing is, once you know what to look for, you start seeing them everywhere, in the books you read, the movies you watch, and even the music you listen to. Literature, especially, has been a huge arena for exploring these ideas. I mean, take a book like Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. It was absolutely revolutionary because, for the first time, it told the story of colonialism from the perspective of an African community in Nigeria. It It showed this rich, complex society being destroyed. It was a powerful way of writing back to the empire and taking control of the story. And you see it in movies, too. Filmmakers like Miran Nair or Deepa Mehta are constantly pushing back against Western stereotypes of India, showing how complex and modern it really is. Or think about music. The whole category of world music is basically hybridity in action. You have artists like Yothu Yindi from Australia, who blended ancient Aboriginal music with modern rock and roll to create something totally unique that spoke to their experience.
So you might be sitting there thinking, okay, this is interesting history, but these empires fell a long time ago. Why does any of this matter today? Well, the truth is, the echoes of empire are all around us, and these questions are maybe more important now than ever.
For starters, that little word post is actually pretty controversial. A lot of critics, especially from indigenous communities in places like the Americas or Australia, will tell you that for them, colonialism isn't post, it's not over. The struggles over land, culture, and basic rights are happening right now. And really, when you boil it all down, post-colonialism is asking one incredibly powerful question. Who gets to tell the story? It pushes all of us to think critically about the stories we hear, to always ask, who is speaking, whose voice is missing? Because it reminds us that the stories we tell aren't just entertainment, they have real power. And fighting for the right to tell your own story, well, that's a real act of freedom.